if you're an outsider, right? If you're not somebody that follows pro fishing like I have for my whole life, and I know the ins and outs of every trail and who's doing what in formats. But if you're an outsider, it's all confusing, right? It is confusing that hey, I'm a professional bass fisher. Oh, you fish Major League Fishing? No, I fish the Bassmaster. Oh, what's that? Like if you just happen to cross MLF on CBS or something, right? Or if you're somebody that knows Bassmaster and you're like, well, you told me you're a professional fisherman, but I don't see you at the Bassmaster. Like it is a confusing thing. So having one, if we could ever get there, which we won't, by the way, but that's the second part of my answer. If you could get to one solid thing where all the best pros qualify through something to fish against each other, it would be perfect. The problem is until we have, some type of sponsorship, whether it be non-endemic, something to make that happen. These tournament organizations are all just businesses, right? So they're going to do their own thing and have, we're going to have as many as you can have because, they're making money as long as guys are paying entry fees. So I think having a lot of them can be an issue for an outsider. Now, the other side of this is we have a ton of high school anglers now.
Right. Yes.
High school fishing, huge. College fishing is huge. So you have all these guys coming up and then there's nowhere for them to go. Like if you want to compete at that professional level for the big money, there's 80 spots on the Bass Pro Tour. There's 100 spots on the Bassmaster Elite Series. So you take all these young guys, a lot of talented guys, there's nowhere for them to go because it's really hard to qualify for BPT, and it should be. But on the Elite Series, they only bring in 9 new guys, 10 new guys a year. You got to make it through these tournament trails, compete against hundreds and hundreds of anglers. So we tell all these kids, hey man, get into this. Tournament fishing is a great thing. But then when they get out of college, there's nowhere for them to go. Wow. Nowhere. And we lose a lot of them, I feel like. So I think having another trail like the NPFL is a good thing for that reason. I think having MLF out there, having bass out there is very good for the health of the sport going forward. I'm Luke Dunkin, and this is the Tom Rowland Podcast.
What's going on, everybody? We've got a fun podcast with you today. Luke Dunkin has Low Budget Live. It's a podcast mostly associated with bass fishing, but Luke Dunkin is a man of many talents. He is a songwriter. He has fished on the FLW Tour, and now he has a very popular podcast called Low Budget Live, and some other things, YouTube projects and other things. Fun guy, man. We had a really good time talking on this one. I think you're really going to enjoy it, and if you do, it would be awesome if you could go to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating and review. The review is also important. If you don't know what to write, maybe if you like this episode, just write that you like the episode, Luke Dunkin. I don't know. Whatever you want to write would be awesome. And if you want to get on the inner circle, that is where I will ask you guys questions for show suggestions. You can ask me questions about fishing. I give a lot of guide referrals there. All kinds of information is exchanged on this platform, and it's the text. It's area code 305-930-7346. Text the word TEAM, TEAM, team to that, and you'll be added to the inner circle. You'll be the first to get notified of anything new, any kind of thing that's going on. That's the first place that I do it. So I hope you'll join that. That'll be awesome. And now stay tuned for this fun and awesome episode with Luke Dunkin of Low Budget Live. Luke Dunkin, my man, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you, sir?
I'm awesome. I'm doing great. I'm admiring that John Prine poster behind you.
It is something to behold. My dad actually got me that for Christmas last year. That was a Christmas gift from my pops.
Right on. So you're a big John Prine fan?
Absolutely, man. Since I was a kid.
Me too. I listened to him all growing up and just loved him. I got to see him a few times. Sad to see him go.
No doubt. No doubt. I actually got to see him. My wife and I went to see him on New Year's Eve going from 19 to 20. So into the dreaded 2020 when we lost John, I got to see him. I got to ring in the new year with him. So
really ringing the new year.
Yeah.
Well, I saw him just a little bit before that. He was at Bonnaroo. At 19, I think. Is that?
I believe he was.
He was
19, I think. Yeah.
It was great, man. He just sounded great. You could see, he had that throat thing.
That's right.
His throat got cut out. You could really see that. But man, he was up there doing it, man. He played a bunch of old songs I knew and some ones I hadn't heard of, but it was awesome. I mean, I just always loved him, man. He just
such a great songwriter. And I'm a songwriter. I've always written songs and played songs and things. So he's always been one of my heroes, man. Just simple, but just like genius at the same time, Right. It's amazing.
Yeah. At that same Bonnaroo, that's when I got to see Sturgill Simpson, who's very
dude,
favorites.
Forget fishing podcast.
I know, we're going to talk music.
Let's do a music podcast together. I'm obsessed, man. I have been my whole life.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I know that you are a songwriter and that you've written some songs, but tell me about that. How did that happen for you, and when did that start?
Man, it's crazy. My love for fishing really started at the same time my love for songwriting did. It was all kind of happening when I was like 8 to 10 years old, was kind of when all these things, and it's weird because the two don't go together, but it was like I was very passionate.
Whistle and fish.
John
Prine thought it went together.
That's right. But for me, man, it was, they both came into my life through my dad. He was always playing like John Prine and John Haidt and all these great songwriters, but I would write poems when I was a kid, like 8, 9, 10 years old, and then started playing guitar at 12 and was just piece little things together. But it's just always been, I'm just intrigued by stories. And I think that's why I like doing the podcast so much. Like I love people, hearing what makes them tick and their decisions on the water or what, outside of the fish like this. This is awesome getting to know that about you. And so the story behind a song was always so important to me growing up. I loved those, like the MTV Unplugs they would do, or growing up close to Nashville, we had a lot of singer-songwriters. It's like the Bluebird Cafe and that kind of stuff where you would go see these songwriters behind these massive hits or, in country music, and they would tell the story. And that was just always so cool to me. Like that hearing where that came from and your brain, how did you come up with that?
Really
that was always amazing.
It's cool to see the songwriters. Like when I have a friend that I went to college with, and he works for BMI, and he entertains the songwriters, and he has this, the Key West Songwriters Convention. You're familiar with that, right?
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
Every time he would come in town, he's like, "Hey, man, come down and I got a seat for you." And my wife grew up with him too, so we would go down there and see him, and then we would get to see these songwriters perform their own songs, and then they would perform these others. They were their own songs, but you didn't know that they wrote these songs.
That's right.
And then they would tell the story about what it was that made them write this song or why. And it was super cool. And then you listen to that song completely differently.
Yes.
From then on, it's so cool. And then like with John Prine and Sturgill Simpson, like I didn't even know that they were friends. And then I'm going through the credits one time, and it's like, John Prine's the songwriter on this with Sturgill Simpson. And then after John Prine died, he left Sturgill Simpson this Porsche. And it was so cool. And then he started recording his new album in John Prine's old studio. I don't know, just to put those two together and to think, man, I grew up listening to John Prine and I always had a connection with him for some reason. And now I feel this connection to Sturgill Simpson, and to know that they have a connection to one another. It's like, well, I guess I guess I gravitate to both because
that's right.
Because of the songwriting.
I feel like in the music, all the music I love is intertwined. Like you're saying, whether you realize it or not, but then you start digging in, you're like, oh, well, so-and-so plays on this and they wrote with this guy. And like, it's all intertwined so much, especially that Nashville area. Those songwriters, the good ones, they really tend to kind of gravitate towards each other. And something that was so cool for me about Prine was the young guys. He always loved the ones that were making their mark, whether it was Jason Isbell, he took Jason, he was the, a godfather for Jason's daughter.
I didn't
know
that.
Cool, man. Yeah, absolutely. And so he always gravitated to these young artists. You've seen him, really, whether it's like Hayes Carl in Texas, or he always just lended an ear to those guys, would write with them, would always help them out. And that was just so cool about John, but I do, all music's connected in some way. If you like somebody, there's you'll love 10 more that they're friends with.
I would think that I could kind of see it in my mind that Sturgill Simpson goes to John Prine and he's like, John, I need some help. This song isn't funny at all. And I need you to help me make it funny.
Or hey, John, I'm probably about to make half my fan base mad with this album. And John's like,
you are. But I love it. Go for it, man.
Yeah, go for it. That's right. That was John's advice. Just be you.
That's what I like about Sturgill Simpson right now is he's one of the few people that is willing to put it on the line, man, and do something totally different. He's just true to
himself, man.
Totally different.
He's true to himself. I love the bluegrass albums, the recuts of the songs. But he lost a lot of people on that, the rock album.
The Sound and Fury. But that's my favorite.
Yeah, dude, it's great. It's great. It's fantastic. That's me. Like, I love it. I love whether he's doing twangy country or doing that. Dude, the songs, it's like I said, the story, those songs, if you broke them down and he played them on just acoustic, you'd be like, man, those are great songs, but the sounds throw everybody off. I think it's fantastic. I love it.
I loved it, man. I haven't listened to an album as many times as I have Sound and Fury, maybe any album. I mean, I turn that one on and drive and just go. But I mean, it's been a long time since any artist has put out an album that I want to listen to from start to finish. I mean, most people are putting out singles now, And, and that's almost like a Who kind of rock opera kind of thing.
That's awesome.
I just love it. It's
man.
Just got this,
it's a work.
Yeah.
It's a complete work. Yeah. Start to finish. You got to listen to it. You can't just take one song. You got to listen to it. It's fantastic, man.
So tell me about when you're 8 years old and you start playing the guitar and writing poems and listening to John Prine. How do you develop that into like selling that song or any song at some point? When does that happen for you?
Man, for me, I never looked at it. I didn't even know that business existed, right? Like, because I chased that for a while, the Nashville Songwriter thing. And I never even knew that was a thing until I probably was, I would say, high school age, junior, senior. And I had a friend of mine took me to the Bluebird to actually see Nashville Songwriters. And you start to realize, oh, wait, all these guys don't write their songs, and this is a huge business. And I'm like, man, you can get paid to do this. It's kind of like
that's how I became a fishing guide.
Exactly. Same thing for me. Like going to a Bassmaster weigh-in. I'm like, wait a second, guys are getting paid to do this. This is crazy. But for me, the commercialization of it, a lot of people look at it, different ways. Some people look at it as negatively, that people are like, they do churn them out. You know what I mean? It's a 9-to-5 job. They have a formula. There are guys that are very good at it. I was never great at, hey, Luke, we're going to sit in this room. We're going to put you with these two guys and you got to write a song for this XYZ art. That wasn't my deal, because songs for me, they just happen, right? Yeah. Like it may be 3 months in between when I write one, but if I ever just sat down and like, oh, I'm going to write a song today, that wasn't how it worked for me. And so it was very difficult. I had a publishing deal out of Muscle Shoals for a little while and got paid to write, but never had any big cuts or anything. What's funny is, like, full circle with the fishing thing and then the podcast for the last 4 years, is I play one of my songs as my intro, and more people listen to my music now than ever when I played music. Like, it's crazy. So I'm actually going to release some new music in a couple of weeks. I've been writing again a lot, and really, man, it's just so much fun for me. But so I'm not trying to do it to sell anybody anything anymore. I just do it because I enjoy it, or an idea pops in my head, or a melody.
You're a creative dude, man. You gotta have an outlet for your creativity. And I guess that's been part of that is the podcast. And then that
for sure
opens
and fishing
up the
videos and things.
Yeah. It opens up the opportunity for you to start writing again. So
no doubt.
So you were a FLW pro, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
so
sir.
how did that start? Like, you go to that first weigh in, you're like, oh damn, you can be a songwriter and you can bass fish like this. I don't know which one to do.
Yeah, it's ADD. That's my entire life in a nutshell, is ADD, but chasing too many things at once. But I went at an early age. I started fishing tournaments with my dad, like 10, 12 years old. He was always really into it before I was born. He stopped fishing tournaments for a while, and we just, we bluegill fished and catfished, and we'd go back. It was like a treat to get to go bass fishing. I always thought that was like some super, high tech thing. Yeah. And my dad, we would, like when we were small, we were like bobbers and stuff, and then he's like, hey, we're going bass fishing. I'm like, oh, okay, this is different. So we got into that, and then he's telling me about these tournaments. We have like these little local, like fruit jar night tournament things here on the Tennessee River in the summer. And he took me to one when I was about 12, and I was like, oh my gosh, like it just opened up my eyes. And then I started kind of fanboying on the Bassmaster stuff and all that. But I actually fished my first professional event when I was 19. I got into it really early. Almost qualified for what is now the Bassmaster Elite Series at 19, missed it by 2 spots of the point standings. Best thing that ever happened to me, because I was not ready at all. Thought I was, but I was not. And, through a series of different things, I got out of pro fishing for a while, went to work after I graduated college. And in 2015, I got an opportunity through a company I worked for to fish the FLW tour. They had an amateur side, then a co-angler side, and I got an opportunity to fish it, and you could qualify to fish as a pro. So dipped my toes in the water in that. I did really well. I won an event that year, but I qualified to fish out of the front and jumped in, head first the next year, fished for a few years. And out there living my dream, man, loving it and doing good sometimes, not so good other times. And at the end of 2019, they got bought out. FLW was purchased by Major League Fishing, and I decided to kind of step away from that. And I had started the podcast at that time, but I'm back fishing some Bassmaster Opens this year, and it'll always be life. It's like songwriting. Tournament fishing is just something that, I can't shake it. It's a terrible addiction.
There's a lot going on with the bass fishing tournaments right now. I mean, you have the MLF seemingly, to an outsider kind of coming out of nowhere and
that's right,
taking over like all of a sudden and why, in your opinion, why did that happen? Like, is it the format, or is it that the anglers are part of I know Shaw Grigsby was a part of, Gary Klein was a part of that. And so there's some ownership of those particular tournaments by the anglers, if I'm not mistaken. I might be mistaken.
Yeah, there are about 12 of those guys out of the 80 that have some ownership in it. And, I think things on the Bassmaster side, they didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. And those guys, basically, when they made the jump to the Bass Pro Tour, MLF Bass Pro Tour, there were no entry fees, right? We've always fished for our own money, essentially, but they were only able to do that for 1 year. And now they're back fishing for entry fees. So it's kind of shifting again. Bassmasters really, as long as they have the classic, I feel that they're still going to be, that's the Super Bowl of bass fishing as far as tournaments are concerned. So as long as that's still there, Bassmaster's still around and relevant. The Elite Series is rocking and rolling, but BPT, they did change things, but I don't think it was a format thing. I think, Shaw and Gary, some of those guys, their goal for years, man, 20 years probably, I've heard these things of no entry fees, right? They want to, it's like the PGA Tour. Why are we paying to be a professional? Like, it is silly, like the entire concept. Yeah. And so that's kind of where that formed. And just due to whether it be, sponsorship or whatever economy, they're back paying entry fees now. And I think that's why we saw this major shift, because you had 50, 60 guys leave the Bassmaster Elite Series, from Kevin Van Dam, Gary, these guys, that's where they made their living for years. And they were just gone overnight. And it was a crazy time, man. That was at the end of 2019. Things have kind of leveled out now. It's we've got another trail I actually commentate for called the National Professional Fishing League that's out there now. Just another professional trail opportunity for guys to win money.
And you're doing the commentating, you say?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Okay. I'm doing all day. We stream 20 hours of live coverage from each event online. Myself and a fellow pro David Dudley.
Okay.
You probably know of David. He's one of the all-time leading money winners on the FLW side of things, but he actually fishes MLF, but he and I commentate those. We got 6 events this year, but so it's new this year. So there's a lot of things going on, man. And I think that there's a lot of good in the sport, and there's a lot of bad as far as just for the anglers. That, like I'm saying, the entry fee thing needs to be addressed. They tried that, but it's really hard. Our industry is really small, you know. I mean, you know that it's pro fishing is not. We all like to think it's this big, you know, on the bass side. Oh man, it's got the jerseys and the boat wrap. Man, it is minute compared to other sports. Well, you know, it just is.
Yeah, compared to other sports. But
yeah, absolutely.
But professional fishing has certainly had its ups and downs. I mean, over the years, being on ESPN and then off ESPN and then back on ESPN again, and then all these different things. I mean, you go back to like Alton Jones. I got to fish with him one time down in Key West with Alton and Alton Jr. When Alton Jr. was just a kid. We had terrible weather, but I did manage to catch some gag groupers, which was perfect for them because they were using these Cincos. He was like, I don't know how we're going to catch these things, man. He's like, I do. We're going to do this. I was like, okay, whatever. It was like the coldest day in Key West history that I ended up fishing with those guys. But he won that Mega Bucks tournament, you know, like that was a huge one for him. Like big money. I mean, so bass fishing has had the huge money. Then it's, you know, I mean, and just ups and downs. But I see that it's something that people are super passionate about. There is definitely the fan base there. And I don't know where it's headed. If more tours means dilution, and then, you know, people aren't as interested because you've got, you know, a Kevin Van Dam over here, but then you got another awesome angler over here, and they never actually compete against one another again. I don't know. I mean, what's your opinion of that? Like, is there too many, or could there be too many? I guess is the question. Are there too many?
We've got there's so many. And that's a loaded question, but I'm going to try my best to answer. Because if you're an outsider, right? If you're not somebody that follows pro fishing like I have for my whole life, and I know the ins and outs of every trail and who's doing what in formats. But if you're an outsider, it's all confusing, right? It is confusing that hey, I'm a professional bass fisher. Oh, you fish Major League Fishing? No, I fish the Bassmaster. Oh, what's that? Like if you just happen to cross MLF on CBS or something, right? Or if you're somebody that knows Bassmaster and you're like, well, you told me you're a professional fisherman, but I don't see you at the Bassmaster. Like it is a confusing thing. So having one, if we could ever get there, which we won't, by the way, but that's the second part of my answer. If you could get to one solid thing where all the best pros qualify through something to fish against each other, it would be perfect. The problem is until we have, you know, some type of sponsorship, whether it be non-endemic, something to make that happen. These tournament organizations are all just businesses, right? So of course they're going to do their own thing and have, you know, we're going to have as many as you can have because, you know, they're making money as long as guys are paying entry fees. So I think having a lot of them can be an issue for an outsider. Now, the other side of this is we have a ton of high school anglers now.
Right. Yes.
High school fishing, huge. College fishing is huge. So you have all these guys coming up and then there's nowhere for them to go. Like if you want to compete at that professional level for the big money, there's 80 spots on the Bass Pro Tour. There's 100 spots on the Bassmaster Elite Series. So you take all these young guys, a lot of talented guys, there's nowhere for them to go because it's really hard to qualify for BPT, and it should be. But on the Elite Series, they only bring in 9 new guys, 10 new guys a year. You got to make it through these tournament trails, compete against hundreds and hundreds of anglers. So we tell all these kids, hey, man, get into this. Tournament fishing is a great thing. But then when they get out of college, there's nowhere for them to go. Wow. Nowhere. And we lose a lot of them, I feel like. So I think having another trail like the NPFL is a good thing for that reason. I think having MLF out there, having bass out there is very good for the health of the sport going forward. Now, from a sponsorship standpoint, again, they're all splitting up this little pie, right, in the fishing world. So there's good and there's bad. I mean, it's a wild time right now, man, in pro fishing. Like you said, we've seen like mega bucks. We've seen at one time the Forest Wood Cup in FLW, which doesn't exist anymore, paid $1 million first place for a guy for catching 20 pounds of bat. Like, those days but they're in the past now. It's crazy to see.
But maybe it comes back though.
Hopefully, man. Hopefully.
I think it could. Like
absolutely.
All it takes is a big sponsor that sees that if they give $1 million, they're going to make 20. So that's right. That's how it works, right?
That's exactly right. ROI. That's what it's about.
Well, I never thought about like what you said. Because you look at the high school fishing and the college fishing, and you're like, man, that's awesome. There's lots of people coming up. But I never thought about, what they do beyond that, because there are lots and lots of schools that have programs, and then they get out and they're competing for 9 spots. I mean, that's super competitive.
It's tough. Yeah. And I'm not saying not everybody that fishes tournaments deserves to be a pro or needs to be a pro, right? Like a professional is something you earn, you work your way up, you qualify. But that being said, there are a lot of talented anglers, so many talented anglers that kill it in college. And then there's just nothing. There's nothing for them to, they have one mechanical issue in a Bassmaster Open and they don't qualify for the Elite Series. So they don't get to go on and showcase their skills and potentially make a living doing what they love. And so I think it's really good to have these options out there, and I think we always will. I really do think because look, there's one thing I know about bass fishermen, and really it's all fish. I think, Tom, you'll agree with this is all fishermen. Nothing's ever good enough, right? We're never satisfied. There's always a bigger one. There's always, they're going to pay us this much more money. It's a lot like a union in a way, right? Like, and so as long as somebody's like waving another carrot, hey, check this out. We're going to do this. Oh, guys will go there. We've seen it. The Bassmaster guys have done this before. They went to FLW when they were paying all that big money. FLW was a new tournament trail essentially in the 90s, late 90s. They all went that way. Well, then Bass upped their game money-wise. They're like, oh, well, we're back at Bass.
Right.
And so we've seen this several times, man. So I think these trails, they're around to stay for sure.
That's good. I mean, it's good because it's
healthy.
It's cool, man. Yeah, it's good for the sport and getting so many people out there. I mean, this year there's been anglers coming out of the woodwork because of COVID, and I'm sure you've seen it in the bass world. We've certainly seen it in the fishing world. I mean, in the saltwater world, of just lots of new anglers, and that's healthy too if managed properly. Your podcast, man, your podcast is awesome. And you guys have a good time on there, and I can tell you just have a good time all the time, But tell me about starting that, because you started that pretty early, like for podcasting. It seems like.
Yeah, about 4 years ago, and man, we didn't take it, and I still don't take it as serious as I probably should. Hopefully, my sponsors aren't listening to this, but we started it. The name Low Budget Live. I had music equipment. I figured out how to convert some of it into podcast equipment, and we broadcast these LBLs on Instagram. We had no MacBook to record on. They were up for 24 hours, and we would drag this equipment to all these we're at the Bassmaster Classic backstage, broadcasting with mics and everything into an iPhone on Instagram, and they were gone 24 hours later. I had one night Bill Dance, Jimmy Houston, and Roland Martin all at a corner booth of this, and I have no record of it other than a screenshot somebody took when they were watching it. Stupid. We did that for like a year, just just for fun, right? When we're at these events. And finally, a friend of mine, Brian Stockel, who is Ike and Ellie's producer for Ike Live, he called me and says, Duncan, you got to start recording these. Like, you're wasting your time. This is crazy. Like, people want to go back and listen to this. I'm like, all right. So I invested in some equipment, a little bit of equipment, I still don't have a lot. And we started recording them, and I started getting more serious about doing a weekly, just audio podcast for iTunes and Spotify. And then in 2019, I was documenting my FLW tournaments. I had a friend of mine, Austin Boyd, was filming those. We were kind of showing the good, the bad, the ugly, behind the scenes, like where we stay, what we do, the whole thing. And so I got on YouTube and never had done that. And in the fall, I was like, I'm going to start just setting up a little camera and videoing myself and throw the podcast up on YouTube. Well, man, that's when people started really paying attention to it. I had a loyal listener base and to that, and then to that moment, and then YouTube just exploded that, man. People really started, watching and commenting, and it's just been a lot of fun. And there were definitely a lot of bass fishing podcasts before me. The guys from Ike Live, Bass Talk Live, Straycast, all those guys, good friends of mine. Thank the world of those guys. But there were a lot out there. But man, I think what helped me the most was I was just honest. It was just. I didn't run from anything. There was a lot of controversial stuff going on in that 2019 time, like I'm saying, with the split. Mm-hmm. And I just always spoke my mind about it, and people just seem to enjoy that. And, if you're talking to me on this podcast, that's the same guy you're going to talk to if you run into me on the street. So. Right.
I guess you got to balance. You got to be a little bit careful with sponsors and stuff like that when you just start speaking your mind.
A little bit, but the sponsors came for me. I had one Startron, Starbright back in the beginning. We honestly, I got a bottle right here. We did this as a goof. We brought one of these bottles to one of our Instagram lives, and I'm like, presented by Startron, just being funny. Right. Well, they call me and they're like, hey, we want to start doing that. And they were sponsoring my fishing at the time, right? I was on their deal, but they're like, hey, we want more of that. And I'm like, what? You're listening to that? We're just joking. So truly, I mention them on every show, shake a bottle at the first of the show. But most of my sponsors came, some of them were with me when I started, but a lot of them are newer, and they reached out to me because they were fans of what I did. And that is number one thing I tell them is look, I'm probably going to step on your toes at some point. I hope not. But if I do, and we've had a couple situations like where they call and go, hey, yeah, we got a phone call. I'm like, all right, yeah, well, I'll tone it down. But it just because it is a very small industry, this. Oh, yes. And so when I talk about one tournament trail or, what's going on, some of my sponsors sponsor some of the tournament trails. Yeah, so it can get interesting, but I'm very grateful, man, that people are the people that I work with are very Team Luke on everything. And it's a blessing to say the least, because I hit record and start talking sometimes, and I'll listen back and go, I should have said that. Sometimes, not a lot.
It's also the problem of talking and recording a lot, and sooner or later you say something that maybe you might not should have, but not everybody has a microphone in front of them as much as you do, that's right. You just got to be kind of careful, I would imagine. What do you think has been your favorite guest that you've had?
Oh man, that's tough. I am so, I'm lucky because outside of the podcast, I'm friends with a lot of these guys, right? From either fishing with them or so a lot of times it's just like, and I think that's what helps the podcast too, because it's like two buddies talking on the phone, because a lot of good friends of mine come on because they've been very successful, and I'm lucky to ride their coattails in that regard. But man, favorite guest. So on LBL, I do a series called Boats and Pros, where we go out in old boats and we just film a basically like a life story kind of thing in these old boats. I surprise them when I pull up with these just junky, terrible boats. And I have to say, not to dodge the LBL question, because I've had so many guests. I'm trying to think of my favorite one, but the Boats and Pros series, though every one of those we filmed have been my favorite because it's like a deep dive more than I get to do on the podcast. Like all of those are probably my favorite. And I've had all those guys on the podcast as well, but I would say the Jason Christie, who just won an Elite Series, his Boats and Pros and his last LBL were two of my favorites, because he just gave us, Jason's a real quiet guy, real guarded, and he gave us, like he cried on Boats and Pros, first of all. I made him cry, and I thought we might get, in a fight later about that, because he's a tough guy, right? And I asked him a question and about something in his family, and he got emotional. It was really cool to see that emotion. But then on the podcast, man, he did a deep dive on a technique thing that I was like, whoa, I can't believe he's actually saying this, publicly. Right. And so those are always my favorites. I've got several of those, like 5 or 6 guys that when they start talking, it's almost like they say more than they realize they're saying, because behind the scene, man, you've got secrets. You guys have little sneaky things, and you hear about these things behind the scenes.
Yeah.
You don't get them on the YouTube videos.
Right.
And when they come out a little bit, I'm like, you'll see me smile, and I tend to not jump on it because I know that they might regret saying what they said. Right. And I hope that people might miss it because I want to use it. Right.
Right. But the funny thing is, like about those little nuggets that come out, is sometimes those guys don't even know that that's the missing little piece of information.
That's
true. Everybody is like,
yes,
they do this and they do this, but how do they put those two together?
Yes.
And they've never spoken about it publicly, but to them, that's just like, well, of course you do that. Right. But they just, nobody's ever asked them the question like you do as a bass fisherman. That's like, but there's this one piece, and sometimes they'll give it freely. And
that's right.
You're just like, wow, like you just gave that out. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I've had some people get emotional on the podcast as well. And it's very interesting. Do you have your guests usually have headphones?
They do.
Like, I don't know. When I first started doing this, I had the same headset that I'm wearing right now, and I would give it to the guests. And you could almost see them, and they'd be like talking, and they've never heard their voice quite like that. And they just keep talking, and they keep talking. And then the next thing you know, it's just whoosh, everything comes out. And that's why I like doing them so much better in person, because you can adjust the volume in their headset and to where it's kind of loud, and they're like, wow, my voice sounds weird. Hello. And then the next thing you know, they're telling you this stuff that they've never told anybody. But those are some of the really
absolutely the ones that I get to do here at my house, in the low budget live bar and grill, as I call it, which has no grill. Just pull back the curtain. There's no grill. There's a bar. I do it at a bar, but there's no grill. That's why my wife always said, "Why do you say bar and grill?" I'm like, it's one of those idiot things that just came out of my mouth one day when I hit record.
Man, it works.
Now it's stuck, and people are like, "The LBL bar and grill." I'm like, yeah, there's a sink. There's no grill. But I've only been able to do, especially like in 2020, it was so hard. I've only been able to do 2 or 3 actually in person here, and they are always so good, man. It's just because it turns into that just natural conversation. Set up a camera, turn the mics on, not even really any topics. You just, they're so good. I had Justin Atkins, an Elite Series pro. He lives down the road. He came up earlier this year, and it was one of my favorites, just because I know Justin real well, and it's like like you're saying, kind of let his guard down. And it was just like he and I hanging. It was awesome, man. So good.
Well, you're gonna get that a lot, because these guys off the water, and you know them on a personal level, and they've already got their guard down a little bit, as opposed to doing it with somebody that they've never met before, and they're like, I don't know what this. Everybody's a little guarded. Like, I don't know if this guy's trying to get me to say something or whatever. But when I was doing all of them in person, I would always try to do something with the guest first, like either go fishing or work out or whatever they're into, like try to share that with them. And then they're like, okay, I see what this is all about.
Very
like
smart.
But that requires a lot of time. So I was kind of disappointed with the COVID thing and like having to move more to like the way we're doing it right now over Zoom and stuff. But on the other hand, it did open up the guest possibilities greatly.
So it's true.
I was just doing one with someone from Montana just 10 minutes before we get on. And then, you can just kind of do that, but you seem to have you doing both, right? Like Zoom or phone?
I do. I mix it in. And honestly, it all comes down to me is just kind of how much time I have to edit. I know that's crazy, but like phone calls are easier. Because I record on Sundays. I've got 5 kids, man. I've got I've got a million things going all the time. So I try to, and it also depends on the guest. I have some people that are just like, they'll be driving or,
right.
In between events. And so if it sets up to do Zoom in 2020, I really started utilizing it a lot more, and I enjoy it. But the phone calls, man, for me are still, I'm just old school with the calls a lot of times.
Well,
so I mix it in.
You can get good stuff on the phone calls, especially with the guys just driving. Like
that's right.
You got a Bass Pro driving from one place to another. Probably kind of lonely anyway.
That's right. He's going to talk.
Yeah. That's a man. I'll tell you what, I think between being a rodeo cowboy, a Bass Pro, and a WWF wrestler, that has got to be like the 3 toughest things. I mean, think about it, man. You're away from your family all the time.
That's right.
You just got beat up in all 3 of those sports. I mean, you're taking a hard ass boat ride across the Great Lakes or something, and you just got beat up for 3 days. And now you got to get in the truck and go. And I don't know. I mean, the same thing with a rodeo cowboy. You just got beat up. And now you got to get in the car and go somewhere else. Same with a professional wrestler, man. Even though it might be fake, but that doesn't mean that a 300-pound dude doesn't land on you.
That's right.
Accidentally sometimes. And now you got to carry that torn labrum around for the rest of the season or whatever with no room to. I mean, all 3 of those sports are just tough, man.
You hear guy, the Undertaker now has retired. He's done some podcasts, and I used to love wrestling when I was a kid. And you hear those guys talk about working 200 days a year.
I know.
And oh yeah, well that's when I tore this and did that, and they just shot me up, and I went back out, and like, oh, you don't have time to have surgery? Well, no, you're the Undertaker. We've got WrestleMania next week. You're going to do it with 2 blown out knees, and we're just going to try to make it easier on you in some way. Like their story, it's incredible, man. But you're right. You go on to the next show.
Yeah. Well, it's just like you're talking about with bass fishing. It's gotten so competitive that there's so many people that want to do that professional wrestling, and you got so much talent below you that like I think I listened to that same podcast that you're talking about. And the Undertaker's like, no, man, you don't not show up, because if you don't show up, they put the next guy in there. I mean, even if you're like the Undertaker, like you gotta keep showing up, even if you are compromised or whatever. They'll do some other little thing, but you got to be there. It out.
That's
you got to be there. But that's the same with the bass fishing. Is like you were saying, it's so competitive that if you have a mechanical issue and you can't fish, you're done. And that was the way it was even in the redfish tournaments that we did. I mean, if you had one bad finish, you could have, maybe there's a 6 tournament series and you have 5 tournaments where you're in the top 6 or whatever, and you have one where you're 75th. I mean, it's over. A guy that got 10th place in everything beats you because you have that one thing that just blew you out of the water. And it's just,
and it doesn't mean you're a bad angler, right? Like that, that's the perception I see. We joke, I call it the mom's basement crowd, but in comments, beating a guy up for having a bad tournament. But that's something I joke about. I'm like, listen, these guys put everything on the line to go do this. Just because the guy finished 70th out of 100 doesn't mean he's a bad angler. You don't know how his week went, because there is such a fine line in professional bass fishing between 100th and winning.
Yes.
Every single week. And it could be a lost fish. It could be a mechanical issue. It could be being late for weigh-in because of a mechanical. There's so many variables you could be in the right area with the guy that wins, and he simply beat you to the area first. And so you had to give it to him. I mean, so many things that can happen. So I hate when I see people really kind of pick on professional bass fishermen from an internet comment, standpoint. Cause it's like, man, these guys,
it's a tough way to make it.
Could easily go the other way, and they could win $100,000 and be holding the trophy.
How much do you think, like in so many of the tournaments that we fish in, and they're different, all different kinds of tournaments. We fish in a bunch of different, or we have fished, I don't fish in any tournaments anymore, but we have fished in a bunch of different kinds of tournaments, whether they're bonefish tournaments or redfish or bonefish, redfish, or some kind of combination of fish, or a tarpon tournament. And you get in this, and even redfish tournaments, like professional redfish tournaments, and you can get into this thing where it's like, look, I want to make the board. And I don't want to get skunked. And so I'm going to fish real conservatively. I'm going to go to an area where I know I can get 5 fish. I'm going to go to an area where I know I'm going to get 5 fish. But then you have the other guy that swings for the fences, and he's like, man, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to win or I'm going to come in last. How much is that going on in like what you're talking about when you see somebody just torpedo and people are giving them a hard time? And it's like, man, what you don't understand is that guy was swinging for the fence.
That's right. There are guys that do that. And I think the ones that are the most successful are the guys that after you get the practice period, 3 days leading up to the event, most of the time are the guys that can analyze what they found on the water and know whether, hey, I've got a chance here this week to do something special, or I need to figure out how to survive. Mm-hmm. And the guys that do that well know when to take their shots, right? They know, hey, this is in my wheelhouse. This pattern's lining up the way I like to fish, the weather, whatever. We're on this lake that I like, whatever the case is. And they know whether to go through the throat or just try to make a top 50, get a check, get those points so they can make the year-end championship. The guys that, and you see a lot of young guys that come in, maybe try to swing too hard, too much of the time. Your veteran guys are the ones that you always see in that check line, because at the end of the day, those $10,000 checks add up. You might not be winning every event. There's a guy, Gerald Swindle, one of the most popular professional fishermen ever. He's never won at the top level, but he has 2 Angler of the Year trophies, which if you ask most professional bass fishermen what matters more, winning a tournament or Angler of the Year, they're going to say Angler of the Year, because it rewards consistency over an entire season. He's won 2 of those. He's won $3 or $4 million fishing. He's never won. It doesn't have one of those big blue Elite Series trophies. And a lot of people talk about this guy, from a side, like, oh yeah, he's not good. Are you kidding me? Like, that guy's in the check line every week. That no matter how many events he's going to be there.
And
like
he's been there for 20 years. Like,
absolutely, longevity. Yes. And that's so hard to do too. Right. So I think, a guy like, I would always take that consistent career for me. That's always I'm like, man, the guy that can just show up no matter where they drop him out of a helicopter, he's going to find 5 bass. That's cool to me. Yeah. Besides the big heavy hitter guy that's weighing the big ones, that's fine too. But the guy that's just like always figures out a seasonal pattern, is so cool to me.
He's going to always be there. And that is really, really, that's quite a skill in itself. Is like, you're going to not only figure out where they are, but you're going to come in with some respectable fish, and you're going to have a top 20, top 10, top something. And you may not win, but then you have the other guys, like somebody that's winning a lot, like Jordan
yes.
Lee. Like, what's that?
Jacob Wheeler. Yeah.
Like, I mean,
Brandon Polnick.
All of those names. Like, those are some young, tough to beat guys that seem to always be there. And like, I grew up in Tennessee, and I always wanted to be a professional bass fisherman. I thought that's what I thought that was my thing. But then, I learned about fly fishing, got interested in that, and then learned about saltwater fishing. And now I just watch from the sidelines on the bass fishing. But you gotta, whatever you say about tarpon fishing or permit fishing or bone fishing, man, I have so much respect for those guys that are doing that, because just with my short stint in professional red fishing and then the other tournaments that we've done in Florida, it's so hard. It is so hard to be consistent in those things. And then you see somebody like a Kevin Van Dam or Jordan Lee or Jacob Wheeler or Brandon Polnick, and they're like, not only are they consistent, but like it's happening for them. Like, they are making it happen. And even when things go wrong, like, what was it when Jordan, his trolling motor broke or something broke, and he's like, well, I'll just fish here. And he ends up doing great. Yeah. And
that was his first. Yeah. His motor went out, and he fished the same.
That's a winner. That's a winner right there.
Well, and you know this term well, he's a fishy dude, right?
Yeah,
like, he's got gills. Like, he's just always around. I've known Jordan since he was a kid, and it's like, he's just always around. He just falls into him all the time. And he's like all shucks about it. But that guy's a stone cold killer. Yeah. Like, if he shows up at the ramp and you're in a tournament, you're like, oh no, oh no. Like, you just, and it's the same with Wheeler, like all these guys. And I say this a lot on the podcast. They're obsessed. It's not They're competitive. They're more competitive than you. They're better. They're obsessed with bass fishing. When they're not in a tournament, you know what they're doing? They're bass fishing. That's what they do. On their off days, they bass fish. They work on the things. Oh, I might not be good at this technique. They'll go spend 7 days straight, daylight to dark, getting better at it. And then the next tournament, they beat you with it because they're obsessed with catching and figuring out bass, man. And you have to love it. Take the sponsor stuff aside, the business part, and they're good at that too, right?
Sure.
That's what makes them dangerous. Like Jacob and Brandon are two of the best on the business side of it. Social media, video, like these guys just kill it. And they beat your brains out on the water, but you have to love it, man. Like you have to be, and it's the same with you in the salt world, which by the way, every bass fisherman wants to be a saltwater guy. And I think every saltwater guy wants to be a bass guy. I swear. Carter Andrews told me that one time. He said, buddy, I wanted to be a bass pro growing up. And I'm like, Absolutely. You got the coolest life of anybody I know. Why do you want that?
No, he definitely does. I mean, that's not something that he just told you. He told me that 20 years ago when we were guiding in Jackson Hole together. He's like, this fly fishing's okay, but I'd really like to be bass fishing right now.
I want to be smallmouth fishing somewhere. Yeah.
Well, and he learned that there were smallmouth in Idaho, and he goes up there.
Yes, he did.
Whacks them, man.
Yes, he does. He has promised me a trip to that lake a few times, and I'm begging at this point. So again, Carter, publicly, I'm calling you out once again.
Yeah,
I've done that several times.
He'll probably take you.
He'll come through. Carter's I've got to spend some time on the boat with Carter, and I hope to get to do the same with you at some point, man. Sure. I've respected you guys for so long. I'm always Tennessee boy watching the saltwater stuff, man. I always just actually love it.
Me and Carter are both Tennessee boys too.
What part of Tennessee?
I grew up in Chattanooga.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Carter grew up in Nashville, and my wife's from Nashville. Right down the street from Bluebird Cafe is where she grew up, right there in that Green Hills area. Okay. So, I mean, I think that certainly Carter and I cut our teeth on bass fishing. And then the funny thing about both of us is that we went out and found ourselves in the same place in Jackson, Wyoming. He was working for Dennis. I was working for Bressler Outfitters. We were guiding at the same time in those places, and then separated, and then came back together to fish a bunch of the tournaments with him and Heidi. We fished the Redbone tournaments in the Keys. We fished the Madfin together, and then now he's a Florida guy, but he was all over the place. I mean, he's had a great career and a great life. He's got a great show now, but Carter's a guy that he loves fishing. Like he truly loves it.
Obsessed.
Like when you go fishing with him, it's not like, like this is how we do it or whatever. He's just all in. I mean, the last time that I actually went fishing with Carter, I think he invited me up to his dad's lake in Nashville, and we were catching these little, probably 15-inch bass. And he was excited. Both of us were as excited as if we were, catching tarpon or sailfish or whatever. I mean, it's just cool. Some people just like fishing.
They just love it, man. And I've been fortunate when I've gone with him. People have asked me, what's it like going with Carter? And I find this with a lot of guys. I'm sure you're the exact same way to share a boat with. I'm this way. It's not, dude, it's all business. Like I have fun, but I want to catch them. And he's like that. I'm thinking, we got here. We're gonna have a good time. Dude, he is so intense. From the time the boat leaves the dock to the time you get back, Carter is on it, dude. Yeah. And I lost an absolute monster African pompano with him 2 summers ago, and we were filming, and they had shown up the week before. He goes, man, we never get to do this. We're going to go out and do it. We caught a couple sailfish on one of these wrecks off of Vero, off Fort Pierce, but these African pompano. He goes, man, I'm going to take you to this spot. And I hooked one. He said it was the biggest one he'd ever seen. And a shark got behind it. And I normally wear like deck boots in the boat, and I was wearing flip-flops this day. And he told me to not wear flip-flops in his boat. And as I was getting in, I was like, dude, I left my boots at the house. I'm sorry. I wore them on day 2, but day 1, I'm fighting this big pompano, run around. He goes, it's got a shark. You've got to get it up here. Like he's going crazy. Shark's after it. My flip-flop bends like this. I trip a little bit, get sharked, he went bananas on me. Like we just lost $1 million in a bass, like I would have in a bass tournament, right? He's going, are you kidding me right now? It's the biggest African pompano I've ever seen. I told you not to wear those damn flip-flops. And I'm like a little kid. Yes, sir.
So you know what you get Carter for Christmas, right? A pair of flip-flops. Yeah. You get him a cheap pair of flip-flops. One of those that you get at the CVS, for like 99 cents. Send him a pair of those every Christmas from now on, just on auto ship.
Yeah, that's right.
Just so he'll never forget.
He would appreciate it.
Oh,
he would appreciate it.
He would. He'll think it's funny in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So do you do much saltwater fishing?
I do, man. I not near as much as I want to, but I'm fortunate. My dad and I, we have a place in Orange Beach, Alabama. So I go down there. We do, we red snapper fish and stuff, but I'm obsessed with redfish, inshore, sight fishing. Like I love to go to Apalachicola. One of my favorite places on planet Earth. I discovered it a couple of years ago. Apalachicola Bay is just like this pristine. Like I just love that fishery. Like to go to Venice and do that stuff. But I get to go 5 or 6 times a year. Nothing like I want to, but I love the opportunity. And man, like I said, the last time I was down with Carter, getting to do like 5 days of it in a row with him was like, dream come true, targeting different species from snook to sailfish, over like 5 days was just,
I'll tell you what, man, you got some endurance if you can keep up with Carter Andrews for 5 days.
Dude, listen, 5 days, 8 and nights.
I see. I'm out. I was 8:30. I'm like, night, Carter. I don't know what's going to go on after I leave, but I'm gone. Yeah. I'm not even going to attempt. It's like trying to box with, Mike Tyson. You don't,
that's right.
You know where the limit is. You know where the line is.
Yes.
You just don't even
you got to bail at some point.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's time to spar.
Indeed.
I'm out.
Yes, that man, he's a pirate, dude. Yeah. That man is a pirate. So, but yeah, I get to go some. I enjoy saltwater stuff. I've got a bucket list of saltwater species like everybody else does, and I'm trying to go through it in life. I make an attempt to knock one off every year, and still no telling where I'm headed this year.
Yeah. So, what do you think the plans are for your podcast?
Man, I want to keep growing. That's why I talk to friends, talk to my wife about that a lot. I really like talking to you about saltwater, about music. I have so many interests and things that I just love that's where I would like to see it go, in the future, is to be able to, because right now it's a solid bass fishing crowd. Right. And they don't always want to hear about salt, because I have salt guests on. I have people that I'm interested in on, obviously, and they don't always want to hear that. And they let you know that. Trust me. Trust me. My listener base will let you know in the comments. They speak their mind, the low lifers, as we refer to them. But man, I'd like to start doing more shows a week, at some point. I just do one a week now. And I'd like to see it where I could pull off doing 2 to 3 and have multiple guests outside of the bass fishing worlds, where I'd like to see it end up one of these days. Hunting, saltwater, music, whatever, just lots of different guests.
Maybe you just started a separate show, and don't try to get the bass fishermen to listen to somebody that they're not interested in. Just keep that bass, and then just start another one that's like whatever you like, Yeah,
no doubt.
But you do have a lot of interests. Like the music thing is really cool, because that's gotta open up a tremendous amount of guests for you right there. I mean, being close to Nashville and kind of being a little bit of an insider there. You gotta, when you have Sturgill on, I'll be there too.
Listen,
he likes to fish. Listen, dude, he likes to fish. I know. I heard him talking on there was a podcast he did with Rick Rubin.
Right? Oh yeah.
And he did this podcast with him, and he was like, well, what are you doing? And he said, well, mostly all summer I've just been fishing. And I was like, that's it. That's my in. I'm getting Sturgill Simpson on either the show or the podcast, one way or another. Hey, He'd probably want to go. He'd probably like to fish.
I would think so, man. There are so many of those guys. I mean, everybody loves to fish at some point or another. They've got a memory tied to fishing. You can definitely get in to talk to some songwriters and musicians about fishing. That's for sure.
You know? There's a ton of them that like it. You know, I like the UFC a whole bunch, and I've been able to connect with a bunch of those guys.
I've seen that. That's awesome.
Just through fishing. You know, you figure out, like Clay Guida, he loves to fish. It's like, I wonder if he'd want to go fishing. Yeah, sure, he would. He'd love it.
Very cool. That's all. I saw that. It was very cool.
Yeah, it was fun. It's always fun to, you know, I've been watching him on TV forever, so I was kind of like the fanboy kind of deal. But he turns out he's a good fisherman, man. He likes to fish. He moved down to Florida just so he could do some more fishing. And I don't know, it's kind of a fun thing with the podcast. You get to open that up and talk to somebody like that for an extended period of time. Like you're talking about the boat, Boats and Pros.
Yeah.
And you get to go out there and go do a deep dive with somebody, and you might not get to ever talk to that person like that, even if he's a friend, you know? So is that video or audio or both?
It's video. So it's a overly produced video too. So we started doing that late 2019 into 2020 and haven't filmed one this year between the MPFL and everything else I've got going. We haven't, and I hear about it a lot from people that only subscribe to my YouTube channel because of those. But we filmed 6 last year, I believe. The goal was to do 12, but with COVID, we had to we were cut, you know, right in the middle of it. And we got a couple more filmed in the fall, but going to start filming some very soon. Got some guys lined up, and it's so much fun, man.
How did you get the idea to show up in a beater boat?
Well, I'll be honest.
These super pros.
So I'll be honest. I am a huge fan of Jerry Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. Okay. Right. Huge fan. So full disclosure admission right there. And I loved the goofy music. And I loved the fact that he just pulled in. Now he's not in beaters. He's in super cool, you know, cars, but I loved the way that was filmed. And I watched all of them, all of them on YouTube, all of them on Netflix. And so I was like, man, it would be cool if somebody did something in a bass boat. And I was thinking where you go out with a pro in his boat, right? He's got his sponsor boat and all that, and talk, and it's something along those lines. And I thought, what if you just went in the junkiest, and listen, a buddy of mine, I've got a dealer, boat dealer friend here at home that he keeps some great used stuff, and man, he's been my facilitator on that. But yeah, we just, that idea popped up and started knocking it out, dude. It was an absolute blast filming those.
Well, you take a guy, I mean, it's an interesting idea because you take a guy that's got every single gadget known to man, right? Like they're showing up at his house with on pallets, like every electronic,
you name it,
everything, every lure. Now you're like, okay, you can bring one little bag. And, or actually don't bring anything. I got everything that we need. It's going to be one little tiny bag and two rods. And we're going to go out here and you're going to use this trolling motor that sounds like a coffee grinder and do it the way that most of the rest of everybody
have to do it. Right. That's right. Yeah,
that's a great concept.
Man. That's fun, man.
That's a great concept. Well, man, it's been great talking to you and getting to know you a little bit.
Absolutely, man.
We'll definitely see if we can get together and go fishing.
Yeah, definitely. And an LBL. We've got to do an LBL. It'd be an honor,
man. You let me know. Me know. And we'll do it. So let everybody know how they can find all your stuff. You got tons of stuff.
Luke Dunkin's Traveling Circus is the YouTube channel where all the insanity happens. I'm fishing videos, Boats and Pros, Low Budget Live, of course, every Monday. And then on Spotify, iTunes, all that good stuff where podcasts are found. And then Luke Dunkin on Instagram and Facebook. I'm on there acting a fool sometimes as well. So thank you so much for having me, Tom. I really appreciate it, man.
I appreciate it too. It's fun to talk the music part. I like that.
Absolutely, dude. We're going to get into more of that on LBL.
I'll see you at Bonnaroo. I'm going. I've got an RV. I still have my tickets from last year. That's a thing that surprisingly that I do with my daughter. She's 17 now. So I've taken her when she was 16 and 15 and 14 and 13. And, it's just an awesome thing to do. We see
awesome
all these
experience with your
people
kids,
that we've wanted to see, and it's a cool crowd. You know, I mean, I've been to other.
This year's lineup is killer too, dude.
Yeah,
killer lineup. To it. Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Maybe we'll pull up. We'll pull up at the same place. We'll do some camping.
Perfect.
All right.
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds good, man. Well,
thank
thanks,
you, Tom.
Luke. We'll talk to you
Appreciate
later.
you, man.
See ya.
Absolutely. See ya.